It's more like I don't know.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Hope everyone got here safely, securely. I hope there was enough room in the mamad here.
It was amazing.
That was my thought. I'm like, did they all fit in?
I remember seeing everyone moving again.
Okay, I'm gonna sit down. Sorry, we're on Zoom. Hi. Yeah, they're bringing the sources. Thank you, thank you. We had a little, we normally start very on time, right? I'm very punctual, right? Sure. But you know, I had a little delay getting out of the house, not my fault. And
You missed the experience.
I know, I'm so sorry. By the way, I said the first thing I thought of was, did they all fit in? Did they all, I was at home and I said, I wonder if they all fit in.
But you missed.
Oh, beautiful. I got a video from your son-in-law from Amit Karbacha of all the singing.
What did he say?
I'll send it to you. The boys are all singing in the McClap and the mama there. So our source sheets were accidentally not printed. They're coming in 1 minute. So just hold on. And I'll just begin with a general introduction, which you don't need your source sheets for. First of all, my name is Carrie Miller Jackson. I see some new faces. Welcome. Welcome to my class. Welcome to my classes. I've been teaching here for, gosh, over 10 years and was also a student here, trained in halakha to become a meshivat halakha, which we can talk about some other time. What we're doing today, I don't know if any of you were here for the previous two classes, is we are part of a new program. It's called Wednesday Wisdom, and it's about delving into intense Tanakh study. So it doesn't mean, no one should be intimidated. The syllabus, okay. It doesn't mean that you need to be advanced or have a stronger helps, of course, if you studied before. But always my teaching is accessible, both if you have background and if you have less background, it's okay. And we will always go through the original text in Hebrew, but you always have the English translation with you. In thinking about what to teach this year, those of you who know me already know that I can't, my study in some way has to touch our lives. There's a famous story that I actually shared. I spoke in my shul this week and I shared this story. I'll just share really quickly that there's a famous story of not the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who everyone knows, everyone sees the picture of, but the prior one, the one prior to him, said to his students one day, to his Talmidim, we need to live with the times. And the students all were very surprised and said, Rebbe, what do you mean we need to live with the times? You know, that's like modernity. You know, we need to live with tradition. We need to live with we mustn't live with the time. The times are trendy and modern. We're tradition. And what the Rabbi said at the end, we need to live with the Parshat HaShavua. And Rabbi Sachs, right? And Rabbi with the times of the Parshat HaShavua. And Rabbi Sachs quotes this, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes this story in the opening of the commentary on Torah, of the entire Torah, to say that that this is, when we're studying Torah, it can't be divorced from our reality, from what we're experiencing. In particular, each week as we go through the Parsha, you can see how there's always something that speaks to our lives today, in particular over the last year. Just turning off. And that is what I'm doing. That is what I'm doing in this course. So I chose to talk about two books which seem to have nothing to do with each other, Sefer Shmot and Megillat Esther, although you'll see that they actually have a tremendous amount in common. And they both touch on, this is a syllabus, which I'm passing around now for the year, just to get a sense of what we'll be doing. They both touch on these issues of what, first of all, how the Jewish people came to be a people, how we were formed as a nation, and how we preserved our sense of identity over time, and how our sense of identity was shaped over time, and of course, how we dealt with anti-Semitism when it reared its ugly head throughout history. Of course, these topics are all incredibly relevant today. We will get into that. I imagine I don't even need to elaborate with you how much they are relevant. What we're going to do here is we're going to also not only get to know a lot about the book of Shmot and Megillat Esther, we're also going to get to know the commentaries. So a lot of times you'll probably hear teachers or your rabbi say Rashi or the Midrash or Ramban, or perhaps something more modern, a more modern source like Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And what I'd like to do is, as we go through some of these commentaries throughout the course, I'm also going to give you more background on who they are. And sometimes we're going to see that we're going to see today that their own life experience, we're going to see that the Ramban, especially Nachmanides, his own life experience, had a huge impact on what he had to say about the Torah. And so that is true for us as well. We're going to try and draw out some of the big ideas that we see in these stories, which are such essential stories. The book of Shemot in particular, of course, we began in Mitzrayim. We're going to see how we began. We began as slaves in Egypt. And two, even three, I would say, of the most significant things, the most significant episodes in the history of the Jewish people and all of Torah happen in the book of Shemot. Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, the revelation at Sinai, and then the building of the Mishkan. We're not even going to get to the building of the Mishkan this year, because the way I've built the course is we're going to go through Shemot until around January, mid-January, and then we're going to look at the book of Esther until Purim, so that you are well versed in that for the holiday of Purim, and then we're going to go back to Shemot. And perhaps I'll continue next year even as well. I want to also say one other thing. If you can't make it to every class, don't worry. Sign up for the course. You can get the recordings. You can be on Zoom sometimes. We always love you to come in person. It's always the best experience, even during an Azakah. We can take care of you. So I just wanted everyone to feel free to not worry about that. Okay, so with that, I want to jump in and give you a taste of what we're going to be doing here. One other thing I have to say is, because we're talking about the formation of the Jewish people, Jewish identity and anti-Semitism, and also either the conflict or the synthesis of what it means to have a diaspora and Israel, right? A homeland and a diaspora. Because of all of that, I'm also going to be looking at modern thinkers. We're going to learn a little bit about modern Zionism, the founding fathers of Zionism, big thinkers on Zionism today. We're not going to do that every class, but I'm going to try to bring a lot of that in, and also some of what we're living through and experiencing. So with that, let us open up our sources. So the first source I brought you is the beginning of the book of Shemot. And what I'd like to do here is I'd like to read it with you, and I'd like to be interactive. It's not a lecture, it's a learning session. And so I want to ask you, before we get to the commentaries, which you may be familiar with some of them, what are the big questions you have? Why? We're going to see in a moment. One of the big questions I want you to think about, what strikes you as appropriate or surprising and unusual in the beginning of the story of the birth of Jewish people, in the beginning of Sefer Shemot? Is this bothering people? Should we close the window? Okay, so do we have the AC on?
Oh, yeah.
Done? So yeah, let's close it. A little bit. I usually can tune these things out, so if it's starting to bother me, then it's probably pretty annoying for you. Okay. Okay. So we're going to begin with the beginning of Shemot. I'm not going to say any more. I want you to read it with me, and you to be the commentaries and to say what strikes you as interesting and surprising. So we begin in source 1, the opening of book of Shemot. I'll remind you that what happens at the end of Bereshit is Yaakov and his family had to go down to Mitzrayim. They were all forced down to Mitzrayim because it was impossible to stay in the land of Israel. And of course, Yosef was there, and Yosef dies. And the last word of the entire book of Bereshit is, anyone know? Surprisingly, Mitzrayim. Okay, the last word of the book of Genesis is Egypt. Okay, it's a very powerful message. The scene is changing here. If Bereshit was all about the patriarchs and the matriarchs and being able to live in the land of Israel, right? Lech Lecha, we're going up to Parshat Lech Lecha this week. Go to Israel. Suddenly, the book of Bereshit ends, and we're not in Israel anymore. We're not in Canaan. We're not in Israel. We're in Mitzrayim. And here we go. Oh my goodness. Ve'ele Shmot b'nei Israel. Okay, here's how it begins. Ve'ele Shmot b'nei Israel haba'im Mitzrayim. Et Yaakov ish ubeito ba'u. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, v'Yehuda. Yisachar, Zvulun, Uvinyamin, Dan, V'Naftali, Gad, V'Asher, Vayhi kol nefesh yotzei Yerech Yaakov shivim nafesh, v'Yosef haya b'Mitzrayim. So just these first few verses, these are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt with Yaakov. Ish ubeito, each man and his house came down, arrived in Egypt. And then we hear the names of all the tribes, Reuben, Shimon, right? Anyone who knows the famous Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, we go through them, all the names of the tribes. And then in verse 5, I apologize. It is not usually like this here, right? I don't know what. No, it's not usually like
Maybe
this.
this one's still open.
No, it's closed.
It's actually quite nice
After the outside. Exactly. We're very happy that our young, this is a girls' high school, which both my girls study at, so we're glad they're they're exactly like Dana said, so resilient. Okay, so verse 5, hey, so these are this is the family of Yaakov, and now we hear the numbers. Vayikol nefesh yotzei Yerech Yaakov shivim nafesh v'Yosef haya b'Mitzrayim. So there were 70 descendants of Jacob. This is a whole interesting topic which we don't have time to get into, but Yosef was already in Mitzrayim. Vayamat Yosef v'chol echav v'chol hador hahu Uvnei Israel paru v'yishvetzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timalei ha'aretz otam. So Yosef and all of his brothers and the entire generation dies. And what happens? Now Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, right? Israel's another name for Jacob, begin to proliferate. They are so fruitful that there are 6 different terms here for how fertile they were, and they started to really have a population boom, a baby boom, right, in Egypt. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. I want to also say, for those of you, I make a lot of assumptions sometimes. When I'm reading Tanakh, Torah, it is of course a book of law, a book of religious teachings. It is also from Hashem. It is also a book of literature. I view it as a literary work. It's a unique literary work because it's from God. But there's no question that we're going to see it has tremendous literary values. So feel free when I ask you now to think about what is going on here to also draw on, if you have a background in literature, feel free to draw on that. So what strikes you as surprising and interesting that this is the way the book of Shemot starts? For a minute.
Doesn't mention women in school.
Oh, I'm so surprised you would notice. It doesn't mention women. Okay.
They do, but just men.
Yes, it's an excellent question. In the end of Reshit, I'll send you, I have a whole of our Torah about it. It's a whole question because it includes, we do know it includes some of the women. It includes, exactly, Sarah, Bat Asher. There's a whole question, also Dina. So anyway, it's a whole, Dina, ready. It's a whole discussion. So we won't get into that now, but you are right that right here, we're not hearing soon. And on class 3, we're going to hear a lot about women. So stay tuned. But yes, definitely here, it's much more focused on.
The number 70, that include the bodies, children, or was it?
That's the theory. No, so right. So I have to look back, but is it just the men? Okay, I can't remember. Right. But then it's a big question whether. I am.
So we would try to their signs in.
Yes, and then it counts some of the women. We know there are women involved.
Kids don't have names.
Well,
But we counted amongst the 70s, not either.
Yes, the commentaries say that the women of note were counted among the 70s. The women we know of from the story that were noteworthy for the history of Yaakov's house. Yes.
Can it be that the 70 people that we refer to here are in relation to the 70 nations we just read? I mean, like the humanity started with 70 nations, and now is actually starting a new entity called Bnei Israel with 70. So they're not necessarily like individual, but they are trust and soul, like a nation would be trusted.
What's your name?
Bettina,
nice to meet you. First of all, that's a brilliant point, and numbers in Tanakh and also in the Talmud are hugely significant, especially numbers that are, round and repeat themselves in certain stories. So for sure, there's no question there is a connection in the sense that it's trying to convey something about cycles, renewal, beginnings. There's no question. And certainly we have here, if that's like you said, the universal, right? Here we have a different story, a story of a particular.
Never seems a little bit disjointed, first it's like, these are their names. Okay, and then it's, okay, we have their names, of course. And then how many they were. And then Joseph died, it's like, I'm all over the place.
Yes, okay, so this is an excellent point, and you're also putting your finger on the fact that there's a transition here. First, we have individuals, we have names, and then suddenly we have this, like, this booming group of people. But who are they? And this is what is so amazing about this first. We're gonna spend a lot of time on this first source, this first section from Shemot. What's going on here? Are they a family? Are they, they don't seem to be a nation yet, right? They are called Bnei Israel, but we mustn't get confused. That means here the children of Israel, the children of Israel, Jacob, the descendants of Jacob, right? So what are they? And what ties them together? Just the fact that they all have a blood tie to Yaakov? What does that mean for us? And you're also putting your finger on the fact that this begins with names, but it very quickly, the names disappear, and it suddenly becomes a lot of people we can't keep track of. And who are they? Now, what is a name? Okay, a name is who we are. It's our identity. And so it's suddenly the disappearance of names is also a literary element that's saying to us, do these people have a name? Who are they, right? What's going on? So that's like just setting the scene for us.
She did with Abraham.
There might be,
But anyway, what's the point of this? Strange is that Paro in Egypt is supposed to be a superpower at the time, right? It's a giant empire, right? And suddenly he's worried about this little group of people.
we haven't gotten to that yet, so hold on, but it's a great.
And yes, they're having lots of babies, but he's still Egypt.
Okay, excellent.
Compared to
So hold that thought, I'm gonna get to that. Excellent. Before we get to the question, we're gonna see in a moment that Paro, of course, is threatened by them, and the question is why. So
That's
excellent.
what I say. If you're in a country, it's like saying, if you live in America and there's a war between America and Israel, who do you support? Why did he not trust that they were integrated and part of Egypt rather than they would side with the foreign power?
Okay,
it's only
well, so let's read the text. Hang on. Before we're gonna get to this, hang on one second.
One last question.
Yes.
Going back to these initial is, we have their names, and then we don't get information about their life. How are
Yes.
they living over there?
Yes, 100%.
You know, did they follow certain customs that they brought with them? Did they
Brilliant.
assimilate into Egypt already before that?
Yes, so the sages, so it's brilliant point, and the sages, Chazal, had the same thoughts and questions, and they themselves address this. We're gonna see in a couple of weeks, in a couple of classes, that there's really a big debate around that, whether they did keep the customs, certain customs of their forefathers, or whether one of the reasons they have no names is they've really started to assimilate, like the story of pretty much Jewish people in many places throughout Jewish history, and certainly in the modern period, they started to assimilate, and so they suddenly lost their names. In general, names are going to play a huge role in this story, and also when we get to Megillat Esther, we're going to see that as well. And we're going to talk about that as the class continues. So thank you. That was a really an excellent point. Okay. I'll just say about the last verse before we go on. When it says that the children of Israel multiplied, grew, and were fertile, etc., so many times. The Midrash, some of you might know of a crazy Midrash, which we're going to see in Rashi, which says that the women were pregnant with 6 fetuses at a time, right? Anyone remember that from Gan? Exactly. And so the question is, what's going on there? What's pushing that Midrash? A lot of people say to me, I love Midrash. And a lot of people say, Karen, how can you love Midrash so much? It's like for kindergarten, right? And I think what I try to do in life is to show the depth of Midrash. I hope throughout the year you'll see that as well. The Midrash that's saying this is saying, first of all, it's saying 2 things. When the interpreters look at Torah, in particular Torah, They see every word as having tremendous value, almost every word. They see that it's what academics call the omni-significance of the biblical text, right? Every word has omni-significance, not just significance, omni-significance. It's saying something big. It's not just that it uses this language. And then with Midrash, so we'll get to Midrash in a moment. Why is it saying that they were so, right, miraculously fertile? Okay, so we're going to leave that as a question and get back to it. So let's read on to this point, which we're struggling with, which is in verse 8. What happens next? So we've heard about this great fertility, this great boom of the children of Israel, and then we hear as follows in verse Chet. ויקם מלך חדש על מצרים, אשר לא ידע את יוסף, ויאמר אל עמו, הנה עם בני ישראל, רב ועצום ממנו. Okay, so two things. First of all, a new king arises over Egypt who did not know Yosef. Okay, we're gonna interpret all this. So you probably have some thoughts. Hold on. A new king is appointed, and he did not know Yosef. Now, what is this? Of course, is a reference to the fact that that previously, when Yosef was alive, there was a good arrangement for the Jewish people. Well, I said the Jewish people, that's a mistake. For the family of Jacob, they had a special area they lived in. They were able to be shepherds and to do things that were not necessarily the norm in Egypt. He kind of had a good arrangement, Yosef. He really was a good diplomat, and he worked out a good deal for his family who needed to live in Egypt. Then we hear in verse 9, Vayomer el amo. Now, who is this? This is Hamelech HaChadash, Paro. We don't hear his name yet, but it's the new king of Egypt. He says to his nation, Hina am b'nei Israel rav v'atzum mimenu. This nation, the children of Israel, are great and starting to outpace us. Okay, he says. Now, could that have been true? I mean, maybe a generation or two. Yeah, yes. Yes, there is. Okay, so actually, Kermit's making a really important point, which is we all said here, what was he so afraid of? This is Paro. This was ancient Egypt, right? Anyone who's been to the Met knows this was the great empire of the ancient world. What could he have been afraid of with this group of, if you think about, it's also funny, it's very relevant for today.
Yeah.
What percentage of the world are we today? And what percentage of the front page of the newspaper have we taken up over the last year, right? There's no relation.
Saying on the next today, how much the Jewish vote affected the election?
Right.
It was Pennsylvania voters voted Trump. That was a big factor.
But which is
So
crazy, right?
Yes, because they want them to vote for Kamala, so it's ultimately, yeah.
Okay, so what happens?
I get it, they can say, oh, he's still people.
Right. It's exactly right.
They're running the whole election.
Yes. Without making too many parallels, it's hard not to, but without making too many parallels to the news this morning, yes, definitely. Melech Hadash, right? And what is it going to mean for our world? Is it going to be good? Does he remember Yosef? Does he remember the Jewish people? We could go on, but we won't go too deep into that. Now, what does he do? This. Oh, well, you're saying that about Paro, about Trump. Because, well, here's the interesting thing. We're going to see. No, not just that. We're going to see in a moment. Rashi says, Rashi brings the Gemara. There's a machloket. Was he actually a new Paro or was he the same Paro? Okay. And this is what's fascinating is that one opinion says it's a new Paro who didn't know Yosef. And another opinion is that it's the same Paro, but he changed. He changed who he was. And that's, again,
Give it a time span.
100%, right? It's wild. But listen, but I really want to get into this verse 9. What's shocking in this verse? Okay, Paro says to his people, to his nation, Hina am b'nei Israel. This nation, the children of Israel, are great and growing and going to outpace us.
So Paro is naming.
Beautiful. This is a crazy point that I want to, and we're going to see this gets driven down in the commentaries. Who's the first one to call the Jewish people a nation, a people? Paro. Paro.
He must have known in Israel.
Well, yes,
Aware of the other.
yes, but he's the first one to call them an am. He uses the word right? We say either or goy, mamlechet kohanim, but goy, kadosh goy, in modern English, means something else, but in Tanakh, it means we are called a goy kadosh, a holy nation. Goy can mean a nation, and can mean a nation. And this is the first person in the entire Torah calling the Jewish people a nation is Paro, okay? Not only that, but we're becoming a nation for the first time in Mitzrayim, okay? So these are like really striking and fascinating points. I don't know that I would have read this a few years ago and drawn all of this out of it. But when I look at it today, after everything we've been through over the last, year and few years, it's impossible not to be so drawn to these points. So then what happens next? Paro says something very strong in verse 10. הבה נתחכמה לו כנרבה, והיה כי תקרנה מלחמה, ונוסף גם הוא על שונאינו, ונלחם בנו, ועלה מן הארץ. He says, let us deal shrewdly with them, okay, so that they may not increase 10-year bet. We don't want them to continue to increase. Otherwise, they may, if there's a war, they may join our enemies, and that will be the end of us, says Paro. Okay, so Emma's already said, brought up this point. What was he so afraid of? Now, first of all, what's very interesting about this story is we don't know exactly. If we look back, if anyone who's very into the ancient Near East, I like dabble in this stuff. Anyone who studies the ancient Near East and the history of Egypt and Egyptologists could potentially try to figure out which pharaoh it was, which period of the Egyptian Empire was. However, our Torah is not doing it. Our Torah is leaving it very open. And I think that's very important. So if you open, I'm going to be quoting a number of books a lot this year. One of them is a book called Exploring Exodus by Nachum Sarna, who was a great professor of Torah of the Bible, academic. And he makes a great pitch, a great argument in the beginning of his book that says, the reason why this Pharaoh was so afraid of his people growing is because this was just after a period in which Egypt was weakened by a war with a group of people called the Hyksos. And if you were interested, you can Google them and find out more. And it's fascinating. It makes a fascinating point. It totally, if you study the world, the ancient Near East, the context in which the Bible comes on the scene, it can enrich us about the Bible. It can enrich our reading of the Bible. At the same time, I think sometimes it limits our reading of the Bible, because here we can look at this and we can say, it's the story of Yaakov's grandchildren in Egypt. It's the story of Moshe's generation in Egypt. It's also the story that we'll see commentaries identify with, the Ramban identifies with, Rashi identifies with, and modern Zionists and the beginning of Zionists identified with, and we identify with. So if we say it's only limited to this time, Jewish in Egyptian history, it also limits. So I think the fact that the Torah is vague is actually good. We don't know why. We don't know why. One theory is he was weakened by a previous war, and he had a complex. This Pharaoh was scared that he was going to keep getting attacked. So he was almost paranoid, right? And that's why he took it out on the Jewish people. Could also be that this is just the first example of anti-Semitism in the world, which is that there's an exaggerated, right? There isn't really a threat. It's a perceived threat because they have a bias. They have
created threats in somebody's mind. You don't have to perceive it. You just have to say, almost like I want to create it. What excuse am I going to use?
exactly.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. So we see that he is afraid, and so what does he want to do? He wants to stop them growing. So how does he do this? He starts to enslave them. So if you look at verse Yud Aleph, it goes as follows. וישימו עליו שרי מיסים למען ענותו בסבלותם, ויבן ערי מסכנות לפרעה את פתאום ורעמסס. He starts to enslave them and makes them build these cities, and now their life's going to get really hard. They're going to suffer. And what happens to people when their life is hard and they suffer? They don't have a lot of hope, and they don't really believe in the future so much. And he's kind of hoping to crush their spirits. That's what's going on here. But what happens in verse 12? וכאשר יענו אותו, כן ירבה וכן יפרוץ ויקוצו מפני בני ישראל. So quite a shocking verse in verse 12. The more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Okay, so that image of like 6 at a time and this really supernatural fecundity that we're seeing at the beginning of Shemot is suddenly not just, okay, they have, like they have good fertile biology. It's something more. It's something godly. We're starting to see that there's something divine going on here, right? This miraculous nature of fertility and the way that the Jews are completely turning around a sort of midah keneged midah. How do we say that in English? I forgot.
Measure.
Thank you. Measure for measure. Measure for measure act, that everything Paro tries to do to crush the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. By the way, they were just a big family and he's turned them into a people, right? So the more he does to try and crush them, the more they grow, the more they increase, the more they keep going. So there's something very unusual going on here. Okay, we go on in verse 13. We have to get to our commentaries. Vayavidu Mitzrayim et Bnei Israel b'farech. They worked them hard. They embittered their lives. This is all the stuff we say on Pesach, at the Pesach Seder, about how they were enslaved and they embittered their lives. And then we start to hear about these midwives called Shifra and Pua. I won't read this inside because we're going to get to this in the next few weeks. But the main point that I want to get from this is that here, the way he tries to continue to defeat and push down the Jewish nation is to stop their continuity, right? To say any boys that are born should be put to death. Why doesn't he say all babies? There's a famous midrash that he thought that the savior of Israel was going to be a boy born, and so he tried to just kill all boys. Whatever the reason, that's how he begins. Everything he tries to do, his plans are thwarted, which really just starts to we don't even hear, now this is two very significant things. We don't know exactly, remember I said that we don't know exactly when the time period is. We're going to see the same thing in Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther starts by He b'yamei Achashverosh. Who's Achashverosh? The academics go crazy trying to figure out which king of the Persian Empire Achashverosh was. Was it Xerxes? Was it Artaxerxes? We'll talk about this in a couple of months. Who was it? Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. That's what the Megillah, that's what Tanakh is saying. Same thing here. Which pharaoh was it? Doesn't matter, right? Because it could be any pharaoh, and it could be the experience of the Jewish people anytime in history. The second piece is that we see here that there's an attempt to put down the Jewish people by stopping their continuity, right? And in fact, no matter what Pharaoh does and what the Egyptians do, the Jewish people continue to grow and to spread. And so there's this midah keneged midah, this measure for measure. Just like Megillat Esther, here too, we don't see Shem Hashem. We don't see in Megillat Esther, we don't see it. You could say we don't see it in the whole Megillah, but here we don't see the name of God in this first beginning, which is surprising. If you are the child, grandchild, or great-grandchild of the forefather of the patriarch Yaakov, if you are the child of the tribes, why are you not davening to Hashem for help? What's going on here? Where is God in this beginning? So we don't hear much about God here, but we see that God's hand is going on behind the scenes. It's very apparent that God's hand is going on. So there's a lot of things to take from this. And I certainly want to hear more of your thoughts, but I want to now get into the commentaries. And one of the things that drives the commentaries is this question, that why was it that the Jewish people became a people and started in Egypt? You could say the Jewish people started with the patriarchs and started before, but this is certainly the beginning of the Jewish people. So why does the Torah, why does Hashem set it up this way, that the Jewish people begin in Egypt, of all places? And why do they have to begin from such a low place as slaves? Why do they have to begin as slaves? So these are the two questions that we're going to see really drive some of the thinking here. So the first thing I want to read with you is the introduction of the Ramban to the book of Shemot. Okay, so of course, just to give you a little bit of historical context, we have biblical commentary going on from the earliest time through today. Here we're looking at the Middle Ages, medieval times. Ramban, also called Nachmanides, lived in Spain most of his life, okay? He lives from 1194 to 1270. Anyone know anything about the Ramban? Any famous tidbits? Sorry? Excellent. So Bettina's mentioning that he was famously asked in 1263 by the king, I think it was King of Aragon. Abarbanel is with Ferdinand and Isabella, but Ramban was asked by the king to publicly debate a Christian thinker called Pablo Cristiani. Now, you can imagine that in the Middle Ages, being asked to get up and debate in a majority Christian country, right? It's like a lose-lose situation. Poor Ramban. So he basically had to leave town after that. And I want to point out that his commentary is, if you ever opened it up, it's not like Rashi, which is short. It can be very long. He is what's called he's from the group of Pashtanim, trying to get to the literal sense of Torah. But he also is a great student of Kabbalah, so he brings mysticism into his interpretation, which personally, when I get to that part, I can't even understand so well. So I just put that part aside. But some of the commentaries in his time started to do this new thing, just like when you read books today, they have an introduction and a conclusion. So he wrote an introduction before his whole commentary on Shmot, where he only comments on the verses that he, has something to say. He also gives an introduction. And look at what he says. I'll read it with you in the English for the sake of a little bit of a break. And this is what he says. In the book of Genesis, which is the book of creation, the Torah completed the account of how the world was brought forth from nothingness and how everything was created, as well as an account of all the events which befell the patriarchs, who are sort of a creation to their seed. Right? So it's like the book of creation of the world and the creation of the patriarchs and their family, okay? All the events that happened to them were symbolic occurrences, indicating and foretelling all that was destined to come upon their seed. After having completed the account of creation, the Torah begins another book concerning the story, which came to be from all of the previous hints and allusions. So he's saying, it's not, when you turn on a show on Netflix and it says, it starts to tell you previously on the last episode and you can skip recap, saying that's not really what's going on here when we start the story, the Eilesh Shmot, right? That these are the children of Israel. It's not just a recap of what happened in Breshit. It's saying this is one continuous story. Don't think that there's a separation point. We're shifting, we're transitioning. There's a shift in the world now. We're in Egypt. We're going from family units to a nation, but this is still part of the same story, okay? So he's saying there's a deep connection here. He then goes on to say something else. The book of the Eilesh Shmot was set apart for the story of the first exile, which had been clearly decreed, and the redemption therefrom. This is why he reverted and began with the names of those persons who went down to Egypt and mentioned their total number, although this had already been written. It is because their descent thereto constituted the beginning of exile, which began from that moment on. Okay, so the next thing the Ramban says is very powerful. He says, the way they write, it's not always so clear what they're saying. If you read it a few times and really see what is his point. First of all, he's clearly probing why Shmot doesn't just start with, there was this Paro, he enslaved the Jewish people. We start with, these are the names. These are the names of the Jewish people. These are the names is your identity. And it's the story of how you came to be. But it's also the story of how you came to be in Galut, right? Breshit ended with the word Mitzrayim, and now the Eilesh Shmot, the Jewish people are in Mitzrayim. And this is basically the book that shows us how to go from Galut to Geulah, from exile, from diaspora, from distance to closeness to God, to redemption, right? Redemption for the Ramban will be drawing closer to Hashem. And so he sees the experience of the Exodus, of Matan Torah, of building the Mishkan as Geulah, as experiences of redemption. Now, another thing to know about the Ramban is that he was an incredible Zionist. I mean, obviously, a lot of the rabbis were, to say Zionist is obviously a little misplaced because the word Zionist is very modern, and he lived in the 13th century. But the Ramban, in a few places, talks about Eretz Yisrael. And we know, he talks about Yisrael as very much as the ideal. And we know that he himself was desperate to come to Israel. And he, in fact, moved to Israel at the end of his life. He wound up living in Akko. And he was actually, when he got to Jerusalem finally, we have writings of his. He was greatly disappointed because you can imagine what Jerusalem looked like in the 1200s, mid 1200s. He was greatly disappointed. He said, "How can this be Yerushalayim, where our Beit Hamikdash is supposed to be? It was in ruins. No one was taking care of it. It was depressing." But he manages to create a community in Israel, and so he was a great, sort of what we'll call proto-Zionist. And he even says in his commentary sometimes that the mitzvot are really only fully fulfilled in living in Israel. That when you do them in Chutz La'aretz, it's just so you don't forget how to do them, that they're really only properly fulfilled living in Israel. So the Ramban had this very strong notion of galut and Geulah, right? Being in the diaspora and being in Israel. And we see this came through. And so when he's looking at the book of Shemot, he's also saying, what does it mean to be Am Yisrael? What does it mean to be Am Yisrael? It means, in the fullest sense, to go from galut, from diaspora, and to get to a state of redemption, which ultimately is being in the land of Israel. And now the book of Shemot does not end in the land of Israel, but we know that that's the point, that's the destination. And there's something about this process for him. So this is what he says in his introduction. This is his whole introduction to the book. It's very short.
Can I raise something?
Yes.
All the events that happened to them were symbolic occurrences. I think that's quite a big thing.
Yes.
It's referred to what you were saying earlier on. That
Yes.
you don't have to contextualize it necessarily in any particular historical period because they are symbols.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much. You're reminding me of the other thing I wanted to say about him. Exactly. The Ramban also, those of you who've studied with me in the past will remember the Ramban has a famous term that he likes to say in his commentary. Anyone remember exactly about that point? Maaseh Avot, Siman Labanim. So he's big on Maaseh Avot, Siman Labanim, that what the stories we're reading about Abraham doing Lech Lecha, right, is a prediction of what's going to be in Jewish history. Many of us are going to make aliyah over history, and that's Siman Labanim, okay? That's what many of us around this room have done. And the same thing is true for Yaakov making peace with Esav. He sees that very much as either for the good or for the bad, relationships between Jews and non-Jews in the future. So he very much is reading Tanakh and Torah as being,
paradigms.
yes, paradigms and being immediately relevant. Exactly.
That was also that phrase, if you point that down.
I don't think so, but I have to check that. I think it comes before him, but he's like he's the big, I think it comes before him. Okay, so now I want to turn to some more modern thinkers on what is going on here in Shemot. So first I want to begin in sources 4 and 5 with two rabbis who were very unique. They were partners. They were the head of a yeshiva of Alon Shvutz, of Gush, known as Gush today. They were the first Rosh Yeshiva, and what was very unusual about them was they were co-Rosh Yeshiva, right? We even have stories in the Talmud of rabbis who couldn't get along well enough to lead a Beit Midrash together. And these two rabbis were known for being incredibly humble. They were very different from each other. Both of them are very famous. One is Rav Yehuda Amital, and the other is Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was the son-in-law of the great Rav Soloveitchik, the father of American modern Orthodoxy, and he made Aliyah and became Rosh Yeshiva of the Gush. And Rav Amital was a Holocaust survivor. So look at how he reads. Here we're going to see modern voices and outlooks on the beginning of Sefer Shemot. When they see the words Ve'ele Shemot B'nai Israel, and they look at Rashi, we haven't seen Rashi, but Rashi says, based on the Midrash, that here we see that B'nai Israel, their beginnings, they are names. They are names and they're also numbers, right? Because we know that they're Shivei Nafesh and how many are they? And then they're growing, but they're also names. So which one is it? So look at what Rabbanit says. It's very powerful when you think about, as soon as you say the word Shoah and numbers, only one association comes to mind, and he himself was a survivor. He writes as follows: these two aspects of number and name have to be combined. On the one hand, a person has to feel like a number. He has to feel that he is part of society. I am for myself. If I'm only for myself, what am I? On the other hand, he must not become identical to everyone else. Everyone has something special about him. Each person has a name. These are the names of the children of Israel. Rabbi Amital looks at the beginning of Sefer Shemot and he says, what does it mean to be the beginning of the Jewish people? What does it mean to be a part of the Jewish people? This is the balance that we have to strike. We are an individual and we are a community, okay? And that is the beginnings. We are moving from being family units to a people. And that's what he sees going on here. But don't lose the balance, right? Don't go into being just a number, right? We have to keep our names within those numbers. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein has a slight twist on this, also talks about individual and national identity. He says in source 5, this brings us back not only to the verses, but to ourselves. When are we better off? When we are learning in a lone shvut or somewhere out there in the diaspora? So Rav Aaron's asking a really powerful question. Rav Aaron's asking an important question. Where can we contribute more? We can state, and this is a very powerful question today, he's no longer alive. Where can we contribute more? Being in yeshiva in Israel, okay, and being a great Talmid Chacham and maybe becoming a Rosh Yeshiva, or being in the diaspora and being a leader in the diaspora. He says there are certain aspects of spiritual identity that can be developed in the diaspora. Some aspects of one's personality can be developed without regard to the Jewish past or future. These, in and of themselves, should not be dismissed. We can obtain the status of Ben Torah in Johannesburg or New York, and this is important for the Jewish people and doubly important for the individual Jew. Nevertheless, our fullness as Jews is obtained best, most richly and completely in Eretz Yisrael, which lets us live as rich and full as possible in terms of Avodat Hashem, or service of God, without any criticism of friends and family who live in Chutz La'aretz, who we love dearly and appreciate, especially for what they are dealing with this year. Rav Aaron is looking, again, these rabbis are looking at the beginning of Shemot and saying, why is this the beginning of the Jewish people? Why are they starting in the diaspora? Why are they starting as slaves? What is this message the Torah is trying to give us? Because of course, so much of Jewish life is lived throughout Jewish history outside of Israel. So they're looking at this and saying, when Israel is not an option, when you can't live in Eretz Yisrael, what can we draw on from Sefer Shemot? We see how easily they lost their names, how easily they were starting to assimilate. And also, we see that that's also where they become a people, right? Think about what's going on this year around us. There's been so much, we're going to talk about this year, there's been so much written about how, on the one hand, over the last few years, think about how people relate to Israel, right? And I'm going to speak about America, but it's true elsewhere as well. Over the last decade or two, we have Jews who, on the one hand, are committed to Israel, and at the same time are committed to liberal values, and we're starting to be so critical. And really were distancing themselves from Israel because they did not know how to talk about it within American society anymore in a comfortable way. They were starting to feel, I can tell you that my niece was in university 10 years ago. She wanted to join a club, which was like, I don't even know, I don't remember what the club was. It was like some political club. And when she went to join, they had a questionnaire to enter, and they said, have you ever been on a visit to Israel? This was like 8 to 10 years ago. This stuff was going on way before, right? And she had to write, she didn't have to, but she was horrified. She was horrified that because she grew in Israel, they weren't going to let her into the, can you imagine?
How was the consequence of saying yes?
Well, I mean, she just decided not to join because who would want to be a part of that club? But, you know, but
Yeah. I don't enjoy Woody Allen.
what does Woody Allen say?
I think appropriate.
That's funny. So, you know, this is the world, right? This is the world that when you're trying to preserve your Judaism in the diaspora, this is where Zionism was born. But it's not enough. It's not enough to say, I'm going to be Jewish in the face of anti-Semitism. That's what Sefer Shemot is teaching us. It's definitely a huge part of things, but it's not enough. So with that,
We
okay.
also see the possibility, the analogy of a gestation. During the gestation period, we had to go through gestation before being born, and say that is all about, you know, the birth canal, et cetera, the
Yes.
contractions. So in the gestation period, you have two cells that actually multiply tremendously to become. And they put it from a perspective of the mother who's holding, they're gonna take over my body completely. And so maybe that's the analogy of the whole Sukkim that we read about the Pharaoh being the self, you know, I'm shifting the paradigm from national to really individual to understand the experience and to understand therefore the whole tension that exists between Pharaoh and the Bnei Israel. And it's like the fetus is being created, it's gonna take over the mother's body. And the tension, and then eventually the birth.
It's an amazing image, right? The image of Egypt, sorry, exactly, the Egypt, the image of Egypt as the womb is we're gonna get into
And
this a
that's
little
why
bit.
it's a source from our, you know, the birth, if you want.
100%. So we only have 2 minutes left, so I'll finish with this one section and then I want to get, it's a shame I didn't come back next week because I have to share with you some of the other later thinkers, but I just want to read source 7. This is from a thinker, a writer on Torah. His name's Leon Kass. He actually teaches at Shalem College in Jerusalem, but he was a professor, I think, of like, I can't remember if it was biochemistry or something totally unrelated. He's obviously a very smart man. He started to give lectures on Bible for many years, and then he eventually wrote this book. So it's called Founding God's Nation. We're definitely going to be quoting. This is what he says. Source 7, these descriptions of the multiplication of the children of Israel underscore the crucial question. Are the Israelites at this stage already a people? The answer seems to be no, they are not called an Am or a nation, Goy. Nor is there any mention of God or their attachment to him. Unlike the barren matriarchs in Genesis, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, the new fruitful generations of Israel apparently did not need or seek divine assistance in order to multiply. To the contrary, Israelite fecundity seems to partake of the natural and hyperabundant fertility that is characteristically Egyptian. This is very close to what you're saying, Bettina. A gift of the land where the overflowing river guarantees plentiful crops, the Nile, where the land teems with life, where even the excrement appears to give birth, the scarab, which was sacred to the Egyptians, an emblem of immortality, because it seemingly springs from the detritus. And while Israelite fertility takes center stage, the practice of circumcision, the sole covenantal obligation on the children of Israel, is not mentioned. As far as we know, the descendants of Jacob are now a multitude, sharing little beyond their common ancestor and their extraordinary fertility. So, oh, it's printed funny. So we're actually going to pause. So we're going to pause here because it's the end of class. What I want to share with you at the beginning of next time is this big question of what did it mean? Why is it so crucial that the Jewish people were born out of a state of slavery? Okay. And then we're going to look at a few of the founding fathers of Zionism and some modern thinkers on what really this issue of our identity being based only on a response to anti-Semitism, a response to a threat, versus, which we know is something that is certainly a big source of anti-Semitism, a big source of identity for people. I'll just quote Max Nordau, who says, one sentence, anti-Semitism has also taught many educated Jews the way back to their people. He was contemporary of Herzl, okay? He is saying this is part of what's going on in the story, but there's more. We're going to see there's more. So, that to be continued. And everyone should have a good and quiet week. Bezrat Hashem.
Karen, are you going to reuse these next week?
Yeah, bring them, or if you want me to save them for you. Hello, what,
Leslie says hello. Unfortunately, Wednesday
oh no,
is the day she can't come in morning.
oh no.